Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Influencer Profits. My name is Holly Oxted. I'm here with my amazing husband, Chad Oxted, and we are here with, I've been talking here with Cory Huddleston here for a few minutes, really getting what he's about, and I have such an appreciation for people who are really out to do what they're on, like their purpose. I found that when we can really be in our purpose, it's when we're just aligned and we have a life that's filled with wealth and abundance and joy and fulfillment and all of it, right? So I really want to honor exactly what it is that you do, Cory. So just a brief introduction of Cory. He is ultimately the guy that builds men who build the world. He's truly passionate about helping men escape the ruts to help them live a life of impact and really live the life that matters to them. And I think this is really important, specifically because you only work with men. And I think that's really important because when men can get together and have that safe space of who they are, all that manliness together, then it just kind of overflows into, like, from a woman's perspective, it overflows to us, right? Yeah. So when men can be in their greatest place and they're able to have that space for them, that's whatever you guys do, right? Then you come home to us and it's just a much more loving environment. It's an empowering environment. And then it breathes over into the female and the feminine of where we can really work together in a really powerful way. So I just want to really honor you and what you do. And I want to totally give you the floor and explain exactly what it is that you do for all of our listeners.
Well, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me, Chad and Holly. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak with your audience. And I've always been a fan of you guys, as y'all are out there. I know y'all are working it hardcore. You're out there everywhere and really trying to make a difference. So thank you to you guys. It's awesome to be kind of doing this with you guys. So I appreciate everything that you said about me and Wisdom and Grit. And it's one of those things that Wisdom and Grit is a group of men that are working together to become the best of what we were created to be. Inside of that, my tagline is building the men that build the world. And it's funny because you talked about purpose there a little bit ago. And I think there's so many people that are struggling with what is my purpose. And it seems to be that there's this huge gap in between, like, what we're all doing in life and then what is our purpose? Like, what are we actually here for in the first place? And I struggled with that for almost my whole life, honestly, up until I was about 35 years old. And a lot of that stems back to when I was younger. And, man, I was like the perfect D and F student, right? I didn't excel in school at all. And I was never good at sports. There was like all of these things. And so by the time I hit into my 30s, I mean, my whole life I had spent all of this time like, what am I here for? Like, it was just driving me crazy. And I remember kind of came down to this point in life where my wife had just had my son, and she was a school counselor. She had been a teacher prior to that. This was back just a few years back, so about 6 years ago now. And the school had like lost some of its funding or whatever else, and so they had to lay off some of the staff. The school counselor, they were going down to one. She had the lowest seniority, so she got laid off inside of that. I had just started my marketing agency, Lure Studios, and I was, like stressed out. Like, I started my marketing company with $500 in my bank account, So I mean, it was like, we had just bought a house. I just had my son. I mean, it was a lot going on. So I was walking my dog. I had an 85-pound American bulldog named Amadeus, and I was walking him, and I'm just sitting there going like, why am I on this planet? I was just, at that point in my life where it was like, something's got to give, and I'm sitting there trying to figure that out to me. And for me, I'm a Christian, so I was like, I literally feel like Lord was like, or like Jesus was like, dude, ask me. And I was like, okay, why not? And I was like, all right, God, why am I here? And without hesitation, he goes, you're a builder. You're a builder of people. You're a builder of ideas, and you're a builder of things. And I literally saw my entire life flash before my eyes from a time when I was a little kid to where I was now. And everything that had ever really made a difference in my life or mattered to me in any capacity was me building people, building ideas, or building things, like tangible things with my hands. And it was like I had spent my whole life as this 3D image, and I saw myself as this red on this side and this blue on this side and me in the middle. And in that moment, it all came colliding together. It was like, boom, and my eyes lit up. My shoulders went back, and I knew for the first time in my life why I was put on this planet. And it was interesting because from that moment on, if what I was doing didn't fit in with me building people, ideas, or things, I didn't do it. And it literally, like, to have gone my whole life, I didn't graduate high school. I didn't go to college. I didn't have a lot of the accolades that probably anybody would have ever, I spent time in jail when I was younger. I was getting in trouble. I was doing stupid crap. And a lot of it was due to lack of direction. And, I take full personal responsibility for that. But inside of that, all of the things that I ever wanted, right, as a young man, and really just wanting that guidance and direction and somebody to kind of come up beside you and be like, hey, buddy, like try to help understand what was going on inside of me, and that feeling of greatness that tormented me in the day because I didn't know how to turn that into anything tangible, right? All I could recognize was this feeling that there was something more, right? And I didn't know how to take that and build upon it. And so, like, that's where really the drive behind Wisdom and Grit kind of stems from.
That's amazing. So it's really interesting to me, like, sometimes we get this call and it's so big, right? Because I truly think it's a calling, because it becomes so big that if you don't listen to it, it like can physically hurt you, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
Like, because I know that's for you're speaking my language, but I'm a chick and you work with guys, and I'm sure you get that all the time. But it's like one of the core of my brand, and what I talk about is that purpose, passion, life, and living in your purpose and living passion and living freely. So how were you able to do that? Like, what was your how did you get online, and like what was the kind of formulating story? Like your wife got laid off, you just went online, and then boom, everything was successful, or tell us a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So actually, no. What's so funny is I told you about I had been a part of that men's ministry and being a part of that. And so I really lit up at that point in time inside of that. I mean, I had already been doing stuff with that for a decade, but I really got engaged around that point. And I was pushing into that, and I was coming alongside it to help build it into what I saw in my head, because I have a really a bit of a fiery presence, right? Like I'm very like, okay, let's get this done. Like I tend to kind of get in there, but I'm passionate about what I do. Mm-hmm. And I realized at some point we all had a meeting, and I was in the leadership of it, and they were like, this is where we're going, because they wanted it to be about the relational aspect of it, which is totally fine. But that was not where I was expecting it to go. I was kind of pushing it to go into more of about equipping men and unleashing them into the world, right? Because there's nothing worse than seeing a man who is a shell of what he is capable of being in my life, right? It makes me want to get a sledgehammer out and bust him free, I mean, it's just, that's how passionate and like on purpose I am about that. And so I realized at that moment that the very thing I had been invested in over that amount of time was the thing that wasn't going to be anymore. And I knew, like, I had gone out and I ran for city council in my city where I live at. And, I've always had the ability to influence, but it was in a very succinct way. And up to that point, I had actually launched different versions of what Wisdom and Grit was going to be at any given time, but there's this thing about trying to force something that just doesn't work sometimes. I think it's important to push out there and take those steps, because at the end of the day, if you're following what is inside of you, I don't think you're ever going to go two wheels off, right? I don't think you sit there and just let things happen. I think you have to take steps. And it's kind of like when a child is learning to walk, they're going to fall. Like, it's part of the process. And if they don't, like, you have significantly delayed this opportunity for this child to actually learn something in life. And so we have to keep stepping out, and we have to push into, the darkness, because everything we want is on the other side of that. And so I had started these different versions of what Wisdom and Grit is, and it was Fear Assassin, and it was Juggernaut Mindset, and it was Sons of Legacy. It was all of these things that I was trying to make it. And I did a podcast, and it's funny because I haven't even launched those versions of the podcast. And I have like probably 12 of them from some really big influencers. And, but because on those podcasts, I'm mentioning the Cory Huddleston show, Sons of Legacy, and all these things. And I'm like sitting there going, like, do I launch this with those names or whatever, but it's like, it's pretty interesting because it's this path, right, of me figuring out what all of this was. And I knew I was supposed to be working with men for over a decade, because it's the thing that drives me. I know we're going to fix the world if we do that. And So I started doing that, and then I ran for city council, and that was one of the most interesting experiences I've ever had, because you get in there and you start realizing this is how I can create influence, right, as in local government. And you get in there and you realize like the mayor's been mayor for 40 years, and it's like the people that are pretending to be your friends are actually snakes, like in the grass, and it's like you have to be on your toes for that. And I'm not saying don't get involved in politics because of that. I'm just saying that's the reality of that situation. What I realize is my personality is not going to be one where I have to go and play with the quorum and be the nice guy who's just going to kind of go along to get along. I'm going to push back against it if it's wrong. And when you're in the city council or something like that, like you've got all of these like things that you have to do, that you have to go by, these different laws and legalities and stuff like that, in order to play the game. And I realized that I'm going to have more power if I build the men that build the world, and I can go out and find guys who are okay with working with the quorum, but that I'll have influence on to be able to lift them up into the different phases where they can go in there and do some real damage in a good way, not just to tear things apart, but you know what I'm saying? But also to become successful in their businesses and be the best husbands that they can possibly be, and to be operating at the full capacity of what they were actually created to be in the first place. So influencing the influencers.
That's awesome, dude. I just had something. Where'd it go?
Ah, you got it.
Yeah, I guess my question is I think I have something for your podcast. So you have all these podcasts with these people on them.
Yeah.
If you watch some of these podcasts, is where they'll like throw in an edit at the beginning, and they'll say, "Hey, this is an old podcast I did like a few years ago before this podcast was even a thing."
Yeah, that's a good idea.
It's with so and so, and I didn't want to like leave it out because it's such good content on it, and this is what it is. So you just add your own little thing into it.
That's a great idea. Yeah, thanks, Chad. I appreciate that.
Heck yeah, there you go. So as you were putting this all together, you guys are awesome, I love it. As you were putting this all together, like who would you say were some big impacts, like at your mentorship, like between putting the program and the group and everything together? Who were some people that really made a difference in your growth in getting this done?
Well, so kind of going back a little bit, when I was in like all throughout the earlier part of my life, and just when I got out of high school and all of that kind of stuff, like I didn't really have a lot of like strong influence, like good ones, you know what I'm saying? Like a lot of my buddies, good guys, but we drank all the time. We were fighting all the time. I grew up in Amarillo, Texas, riding bulls and doing things like that. So, it was like one of those things where we were just wild and uncontrollable. And while that has its place in life, it doesn't bode well for a very successful future if you're, kind of out just living like a wild child all the time. And so I got years ago, like I was working at this place when I first moved down here to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I was working at this place called Purina Mills. Y'all would probably know it from the dog food stuff, but we used to make cattle feed and all this kind of stuff. And I was working 5 at night until 5 in the morning, 6 to 7 days a week. I didn't really know anybody down here at that point in time, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But it was everything and the only thing that I knew for the most part, because it was what I was, And it's funny because I hate to say it because it was a good part of my life, but it was also interesting, But I always kind of considered it the gateway to hell because it was just so dark and dirty, and then it just had a weird smell to it. And I was like starting to feel like this was going to be my life, and I felt trapped. And when you're working nights, right, in an area that you're kind of new to, and the only guys you know are the ones you're working with over a point in time, I mean, you start kind of feeling that, And there was this one time I was at this restaurant and I was talking with this guy, and he was wearing this nice suit, and he was up at the bar area, and I started talking to him because I'm like, in my mind, anybody who's wearing a suit like that is successful, like that's how I used to think back then. So anyway, I go up to him like, man, you look successful. And I start talking to him, and I think he was some kind of a sales trainer or something like that. And we got to talking, and he told me about this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I know y'all probably know of. And he's like, man, you need to go get that book. And so for me to go out and get any kind of a book was rare, right? I probably hadn't read a book since Green Eggs and Ham or something when I was a kid, prior to that. So but I went and got that book, man, and I just was like blown away. Like seriously, I just plowed through it, and it was so cool because that book, and I ended up getting all of his books. And I met Robert Kiyosaki a few times at that time because he was still traveling a lot. But it changed everything about the way I saw the world. And the funny thing was I poured through that book so hard, and the place I worked at didn't have air conditioning. In Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth area, inside of a warehouse in the middle of summer, I mean, dude, it's upwards of, over 100 degrees in there at any given time, or higher. And so I'm sweaty and filthy and dirty, and the book reflects that, right? It was just black on the edges because I would get like a little 10-minute break, and I was out there. Everybody else is going out and smoking cigarettes or doing whatever, going to lunch. I didn't hardly eat or anything because I was just sitting there just plowing through that book, and I did it twice. And I was like, I didn't even know books like that existed at that time, which was so weird, right? I was like 22 years old. And, man, I started since I would get off at 5 in the morning, I'd go in at 5 at night, get off at 5 in the morning. I'd go home and shower up and, dress up the best I knew how to dress like a successful guy, which basically, man, I was taking my long hair and brushing it backwards and slicking it back like a 1980s real estate guy or something, and then completely just dressed like I was going to the club or something, because that's just what I, knew how to dress for success, And I would go to I'd hear these things on the local rock station about, because I used to listen to heavy metal all the time. And there'd be some kind of a, foreign exchange trading event or whatever, and all these different events that kind of go on, and they're after kind of the new people getting into personal development. And I'd be like, I'm going to that. And I'd be going to 2 or 3 of those a week, and not really getting any sleep because I was so hungry. It lit me on fire. And I was like, dude, I mean, once you pinpoint your way out, it just you get in my way, I will flip and plow you down. I mean, that was kind of what was going on in my head. And I started going to those things, just eating it up. And I realized I used to be a pretty shy dude, really shy. I had low self-esteem and all kinds of stuff. And I started getting out there, and I was like, I'm pretty good at networking or getting to know these people. And before long, man, I mean, it was just and you start going, and you start realizing the stuff that's crap, right? Because it's just pure fluff and rah-rah-ree. And then you start realizing the stuff that's good. And I mean, so I just kept doing that. And eventually, I kept telling those dudes, I would read the business section of the paper while I'd be working over there. And all those guys would make fun of me that I'd be working with, and they'd be like, you're not getting out of here. You're going to be working here forever. And I think they were probably just trying to tick me off. But, it was just fuel for my fire every day. And I was like, y'all can think that. And I ended up leaving. Anyway, that's a long story or a long answer to what you were saying. And anyway, I've had a lot of good influences. That book was the first one, Robert Kiyosaki, and getting to meet him. And then, I've had a few others throughout life, but some really profound ones have been Chad Hennings, the guy. He's been a good mentor in my life. And, I've got some guys now that are just my best friend, Eric. He's a commercial real estate guy, but he's invested in me nobody, else. Anytime I'm doing anything or whatever, he's the first guy in line to help support it. But also vice versa, right? I'm also a huge asset to him on what he's doing. My mom, my wife, and all these people in your life that are just kind of there. But, you start kind of strategically placing these relationships in your life, for growth. And it's okay to outgrow some relationships, But
that's awesome.
Get the good ones, hold on to them, because they don't come around very often. So.
For sure. That's super awesome. So I know that you ran an agency for a while.
Yeah.
So, and then now I know you're pouring into this community, right? Into wisdom. Is there because I haven't talked to you, it's funny. We had this conversation, we had about an hour or two, on the phone, maybe a year ago or so. And you were really kind of just launching this. And so I haven't really talked to you about what have you created around it? Is there there's a business model, but I don't know what it is. So tell me what you got going on.
For sure. Well, it took a little bit of time to kind of figure all that out. At first, it just kind of started as putting value out there, and getting out there and establishing yourself as an authority in that space, and, getting guys that are like-minded, that are thinking that way. And then, one of the hardest parts about running a group, and I'm sure y'all will relate to this, but is keeping that group, forming it out into what it's supposed to be. You got to look at it as it's a baby. I mean, So if you let it watch TV and eat Cheetos all day and all this kind of stuff, you can't be upset when the kid's unruly when it's 7, right? So, or whatever else, right? So you got to set those boundaries and those guidelines about what it's going to be. There's other men's groups out there and guys that are doing a lot of, and I'm friends with most of those guys, like really good friends, right? But, you look at some of their groups and it's all guys asking some really idiotic questions, or they're just not thinking, or they'll, get on each other and they'll start jumping on each other or whatever else every once in a while. And I was like, I'm not creating that. So what am I creating? You had to be super clear about what am I actually doing with this thing in the first place. And I've had a couple of instances where it seemed like guys were going to start jumping on each other, and I went in there and curbed it real quick. And I'm like, guys, if that's the kind of impact y'all want to make in this, I'm going to see you out. And if you don't self-regulate, I'll regulate for you, and you won't have an opportunity if we can do that. We're in here to build and to grow, you know what I'm saying? Period. To challenge each other, hold each other accountable. I don't care if you ask offensive questions, as long as it's met with the right intent, and it's forcing people to think critically. But other than that, eventually I got to the point where I started calling nearly everybody in my group, and I'm 800 strong on the group right now, but it was like, dude, I'll just randomly be calling people and be like, hey, let's talk. What's your biggest problem right now? What's going on? And you start seeing these parallels, I've got all kinds of papers and stuff where I write down the big things that stick out to me. And then I started realizing, okay, here's what I can base this off of. For me, building the men that build the world, that's a pretty epic statement, right? So I had to sit there and think about what, first of all, equips me to do that. And that goes with the whole heads mindset stuff that you got to work through and all that, because sometimes you just got to step into it, even when you don't believe it, And I think we're all dealing with that in some capacity. I've never really met anybody who was actually doing big things who didn't have some degree of what did I get myself into, at any given time. Now, once they start getting established with it, then it becomes a little bit of a thing. But even then, you can get it ripped out from underneath you in a heartbeat, So I started doing some consulting, and I put together a little package where with my marketing agency, I was really heavy on strategy. So we'd be working with companies that are anywhere from startup to $100 million companies. And I realized the way that I was picking them up, it wasn't through just being like, hey, here's a thing, buy my thing. Cause then I'm just some little chihuahua humping their leg, hoping they'll buy from me. It was more about setting yourself apart on the strategy side. So it's okay, look, there's a million things you can do inside of digital marketing, but the question is, what should you do? And that's going to be different for you versus this guy down the street, because your hopes, goals, dreams, avatar, all the other things are going to be completely different. And what was really surprising to me was how many businesses, even especially at that big level, had no clue. Zero. It's amazing the kind of stuff that we put in our own minds about expectation, or what we already pre-think, what people will do. And I deal with that all the time, but it's if you get real about that and you start looking back at how many people are actually in this world, 8 billion people. If you can't get 1,000 of those to buy your thing, you're doing something wrong.
That's totally, yeah. Wow. So you're right now you're rocking some consulting, and what's the big vision for this? Where do you see yourself in the 5-10 year? Where do you see Wisdom and Grit? What do you think it really? What's your vision for it?
Well, a couple of things. I'm going to be the world's foremost authority on what it means to build a man that build the world, right? So that's my goal. I want to be on every show that I can possibly be on, every podcast I can possibly be on, having written books. I'll do whatever it takes, because the mission is not about me gaining fame. It's about making sure that men rise, because this world is starving for it. We got kids that are sitting here struggling with all kinds of crap, and it all stems from fatherlessness, if you ask me. Because even if their fathers are present, most men now, and I'm not a man bashing at all, I'm the biggest supporter of men, but they're freaking self-centered, right? And they've had to, as a result of what culture has created. And I'm not giving them an excuse. I'm just saying, whenever we come, the whole idea of the feminist movement having created, hey, you're not going to tell me what to do with my body, and all this stuff going on in every capacity. And then you've got, it's where should a man go at that point? And it's not just that, there's a million other things. It's what men have been told they were their whole lives, the providers and all this kind of stuff. And now they're being told, like, get out of my face. You have no business here. And then on top of that, you don't have men being fathered or being fathers. So they're walking around. They haven't been welcomed into manhood. I've met dudes that are 70 years old that have no clue that they're a man. That is sad. That's like watching a lion walk around, just like, completely inept and not recognizing the power that lies within it, And I think nothing that I'm doing is I'm not forcing men to be anything that they're not. And that's the big misconception, because everybody's like, oh, yeah, guys don't need to be walking around just beating their chest and growing a big beard. And it's like, that's not at all what I'm trying to do, right? I think with wisdom and grit, that's very on purpose, right? So you got wisdom, and it's all about understanding life, and not just in knowledge accumulation, but in understanding the depths of what is, right? And so, like, if we exist too far into that spectrum, we end up the dude on the side of the mountain who has the long beard, and he just up there sitting, humming words all day long. And then on the flip side, if I exist too much in grit, I become the dude who goes around like Genghis Khan or something like that, and I'm going around just conquering the world, which, each of those, like, that's a whole other conversation, but all of those things could have been meant to happen in the first place, right? But you think about it, like, what kind of man do you want to be? So I'm trying to create the man who exists right there in the middle. And there will be times where you need to move into grit, right? As a man, you're protecting Holly, right? If some dude's messing with her or doing something like that, you better freaking let that lion out, dude, and go rip his neck out. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what that comes to. On the flip side is there's a time where wisdom comes in, and that's when everybody else is freaking out and you see mass hysteria. Somebody's got to have their chops about them, to freaking hold the line, man. You know what I'm saying? And that time is becoming more and more needed, because it seems like everybody's existing in this state of like absolute insanity. Well, who's going to keep like reality like in place, So anyway, that's to answer your question that. And then I think I'll probably move into like some product development and some stuff like that as well. Doing some more like in-person masterminds. I'm looking at doing something in Alaska, out in the Alaskan bush, be a pretty top secret type of experiments.
I like that.
Yeah, I can see that for you.
Yeah, right.
So I have a really big appreciation, especially, like the feminist movement and all these women rising up like, I got this, independent woman, roar, hear me roar. And I think it's really tips that, and, I'm saying this as a woman and just authentically, that I think it's really, really tipped that men have a very powerful place, and that when men can be powerful in who they are and that masculine, and then women have that space to be feminine and independent, like, we can raise, the whole world together. When we have men that are lifting men and women that are lifting women, everything works better. So I don't think I'm like pro man or pro, feminist crazy, but I'm so pro making sure that we both, like, everyone recognizes who we are and how well we can complement each other. So.
Yeah, I think that's the important distinction for people, is because I think it's easy for people to kind of at face value, without taking time to understand what the mission's about, to think that I'm just like, oh, dude, it's all about the guys. It really isn't. Like, it is, but my mission is, like, I'm sick and tired of hearing stories about some kid who's staring there watching the front door on his birthday because his piece of crap dad won't show up, to freaking be a part of that. I'm sick and tired of hearing about how some, woman who raised, who did life with this guy. And I know there's two sides to every story, but a woman who dedicated her life to her husband and to their children, and now he's just got bored and now he's off to his own thing, and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, dude, I have no patience for that whatsoever. And there's a lack of honor and a lack of integrity among men. And I believe with all of my heart that behind every great man is an even greater woman. I know that. And the problem is, but like, great women, it seems, are so far and few between anymore too, because men have like withdrawn and women have had to, I don't blame them. They've had to step into the place of what a man's job was out of necessity. And then if you got a guy in there who doesn't understand how to use his power effectively, it becomes abusive. And then it's like, you got women who are like, I don't want to let him lead this and that, because they've been manipulated. Yeah. And so it's a big cluster right now,
Yeah.
the only way to move forward, I can't change it all with a snap of my fingers, and I can't do it alone. So that's why I'm like, look, I'm not here to freaking make you a bunch of followers. I want you to be leaders. I want you to be greater than I am. That's my vision inside of this. Like, I don't want dudes to be like lifelong, like, hey, Cory Huddleston's the man, right? I want them to be stepping up and leading in their place where they are. And then we have the brotherhood and the application and the accountability and stuff that comes out of that as a result, and is actually inspiring change rather than just making my pocket fat, you know. Hopefully that happens as a result, but, you know.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's awesome, dude.
Your turn.
Nope.
Awesome.
Your turn.
Okay. So I have a question that I love. It's my favorite question that I like to ask, because I think that in entrepreneurship, everyone portrays the fluffy, you know, the journey to an influencer and leadership and the hunky-dory rainbows and sunshine. And the reality is it's just not rainbows and sunshine all the time. And that really to have massive influence and massive success in life, we have to continue to fail forward and not be afraid to fail forward. So I always like to ask, what has been your biggest failure, and then how did you overcome that?
Oh man, I've had so many. I think, let's see, that's a good question.
A good question.
Yeah, it is like a deep one. Because I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I've had so many failures. I can't tell you how many times I've been to the brink of utter destruction, you know, and been like, I think that the biggest failure that I've had would be probably, it's a good, man, I think, you know, when I moved down here, probably, oh no, well, I went out and I did mortgages for a while, you know, like whenever I was kind of getting out, but I've kind of switched my brain to start thinking about failures as just awesome things that were more catapults. So it's hard to kind of label them as failures without seeing the good side of them so much.
There's a good side in everything, and that's why I like to ask that, is because like people listening, that, you know, your failures are not actually failures. You're just collecting, seeing what worked and what didn't, and then how do you use that for your advantage?
And I think that's the answer to your question. Outside of the, you know, the worst thing that's happened, because I've had so many, and I've had so many hardships, like, you know, whether it be marriage, when you first get married and not knowing how to do that, you know, and it's like when you don't have any guidance, like there was a point where I had a vision about my wife too. I mean, I've had so many really cool reality shifts just from visions whenever I've taken the time to like ask God, you know. And I think the biggest struggles I ever had was when I'm trying to do it on my own and not recognizing that everything that God's created me to be has already been inside of me. It's just a matter of getting it chipped away. And when you start to feel that friction and the thing where you start to feel like, man, I'm in the wrong space, that's actually a perfect sign of you are exactly where you need to be. Because nothing good comes without that. Like, I think of, like, you know, the statue David.
Mm-hmm.
So Michelangelo, he carved that piece of marble, that statue. It was actually a series of statues that was supposed to be all the Old Testament figures. It was commissioned like 30 years prior, and there was two artists. Well, the two artists, they saw that block of marble and they were like, dude, it's an imperfect piece of marble. We're not going to use that. We refused to use it. So it sat in the yard of the Vatican for 30 years. This is huge hunk of marble, right? And one day, I think Michelangelo may have been, you know, early 20s, and he walks by it, and he literally sees David inside of this block of marble, you know, as it was. And so the big thing, like, whenever I tell people what I do is I'm like the Michelangelo of men, right? Like, I don't turn them into anything that they're not already. I just set free what's already there. But you have to chisel it away. Like, so you kind of see yourself as the guy with the chisel and the hammer. And it's like, boom, boom, boom. And he created one of the most world famous statues that the world has ever known just by bringing out what was already there into something that others saw as a reject or a throwaway. It just took the right dude with the right level of ability and the perfect vision to set that free, right? And we all have that in some capacity in our lives, by the way. You guys do it every day. Yeah.
Totally. That's I love that, because ultimately we're not here to fix or change or anything or anybody, because everyone is perfect and complete exactly how they are. And there's pieces inside of you that God has given to you, and, you know, that you can, you know, God, the universe, you're equipped, wherever you're at in your beliefs, like, you are equipped fully on this earth with everything. And I love that analogy of just chiseling away of that David inside the marble, the imperfection.
And it hurts, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Chiseling, it hurts, but there's a masterpiece waiting to be set free in there. So.
Yeah, totally. Do you have something?
Yeah. I'm just thinking like so you said you got this retreat idea in Alaska. What are you going to walk them through? What's your vision for that? Like what would you have, like what's your itinerary for this retreat?
That's a good question. I don't really have like a full itinerary yet, and that's been kind of the holdup, but I do know that it's not going to be some retreat in the way that most people see a retreat. It's going to be like you're going to be walking away with a limp a little bit, because I intend to push these guys into the darkest part of their mind. Not to say that the whole thing's going to be some hard thing, but it won't be sitting around a table the whole time and being like, oh, that was so great. I mean, it's going to be very hands-on. We're going to I recently met a dude who does some NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and like that kind of stuff. And it was fascinating because the more I dive into that, and I recognize how many roadblocks are holding people up that are just mental. And it's just a filter. It's simply the way that they see the world. And when you guys have been in marketing long enough, and once you're in that for enough time and you see enough stuff, you realize how everything is not real. I mean, everything is the way that
conversation. But
what's that?
I said quantum physics. And we were just
everything. It's like it's literally the way that we experience the world is what we have created for ourselves. And sometimes that's been hit by an external circumstance. Like one of my clients, he helps people walk through traumas that have happened in their lives, because a lot of times people just grab onto them and that's their reality because it's what's safe, right? Because again, the chiseling sucks. But the funny thing is that chiseling is going to happen one way or the other. It's either going to be, in the wrong way, and it's going to, make you into a messed up deal, or you're going to let it become your masterpiece. Well, so many people, even guys that are hitting it at a high level, like I got a buddy of mine, he just got listed in the Inc. 500, and he's very, very successful dude. And I was talking about, possibly selling my house and maybe moving to Croatia for a bit or something, and just kind of like with my family, taking them. And I'm like, why don't I? And it's all about mindset, right? It's like, oh, I can't do that because I've already bought into the American dream or whatever. It's like, and he goes, dude, what's funny about that is I actually could do that right now. And he goes, I'm in a place where financially I'm set, and I could do any of that stuff. And he goes, but my mindset won't let me because I'm doing this stuff. And I'm like, it doesn't matter how successful you are in life. There are filters and things that we're existing in this world that are literally holding us back from the next level. That's why you see these, like, traditionally getting to $1 million is tough, right? And then getting past that $1 million mark, then it hits about the $10 million mark. It's a whole other animal, right? Because you've got to adapt you got to become a new human being at those points. And I think the freest day of my life was the day that I started questioning everything. I was like, what if everything I know is a lie? And that wasn't that long ago when I started asking myself that question. Like, what if everything my mom taught me, my grandma, my dad, anything that I've ever learned, what if it was all a lie based on their reality, right? And not to say they're wrong, but to just be like, or, like not well-meaning or whatever, but like, if that's wrong, I've literally, if that's the case, then I've spent my entire life building my existence on a freaking lie. Everything that I thought was built on shifting sand, and I was like, crap, like that sucks. And the worst part about it is now you got to come face to face with your lying self. You know what I'm saying? Like, dude, now who am I anymore? Like, that's why most people don't do it. Most people hate that feeling of just free falling. You got to fall in love with free fall. Because, like, dude, when you get to that point, now it's like the whole world becomes your oyster because nothing is real. And you can start understanding, it's like the Matrix. Now you can start building whatever you freaking want because you understand that there are basic truths to things, but usually they're mixed in with all of these lies or these beliefs that made us feel comfortable about who we are or what we're doing, that you don't even know who you are anymore or what is true anymore or what's false. And so that's why you got to keep surrounding yourself with people, like going to mastermind groups, investing in people like Chad and Holly, and being a part of the Wisdom and Grit inside of the Builder Syndicate, and all these things along the way, because you're going to be blind and oblivious to these things that are inside of you.
That's so good, man. Yeah, we're actually doing an NLP certification right now.
Oh, sweet. Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually had another certification. It was a while back, but it's weird. It's like I've learned a lot of that stuff, but like it's all unconscious. Like I don't really I don't consciously use it in a purpose, but it's just there. But the map theory of like that essentially is our perceptions is like a map, and essentially if you look at a map of your city, well, that's not what it actually looks like, right?
Yeah.
It's just a map of the city. And so, and it's just our version of what that reality looks like. And so it's really, really powerful when people can realize that when you realize that nothing and everything could be
a lie.
Real. Yeah, it could be, if it's real or not. Who
It's in
knows?
quantum space.
So this is kind of, I don't know if y'all can see this. I think I drew it backwards so y'all could see it. But this is kind of how I had visualized this whenever I'm talking with guys a lot of times, because a lot of times if you're going to sit here and tell me all of this is real, like people talking about $15 an hour minimum wage, we'll get a little political here and I'll vilify myself here. But when people talk about $15 an hour minimum wage and they're existing here and they say that's the way that it is and all this, but this guy over here has already seen what that can do to a company, or if you have a level of awareness that understands like nobody can just pay $15 an hour minimum wage, or increase that to that point. That has to come out. Simple economics tells us that we've got to be able to pay for that somehow, especially like a food restaurant, because they're making like 15% margins or some like small, right? So like if this guy over here is like, yeah, $15 an hour minimum wage and all this kind of stuff. But over here, this guy's like, dude, if you do that, you will literally crush an entire economy, because what's going to happen is all the people who are already making more, and you have the potential to become that guy who can make that much more money by learning to add value to the marketplace. So instead, you want to force and heavy hand the small business owner to have to pay more. He's going to have to raise the prices. And if his product isn't like publicly seen as being worth that increase, you're going to put that dude out of business. You're going to lose your job. And now you're going to have a whole force of people out there on the freaking food line trying to get government handouts. And then this dude over here is like sitting here thinking he's all the rage. But over here, there's another dude. Like we've all got our blind spots. And until we get that, dude, we are going to keep flubbing everywhere. You know what I'm saying? And it's all right here. Until we shift to objectively see the world, our views and everything, we can't even begin to grow. If we're going to insist that we are right on all of these things, and I'm a pretty stubborn-headed dude. Like if anybody follows me for any amount of time on social media, you're going to know that. Like I don't hesitate to say things, but it's like, but I'm also the first person, if somebody comes to me with an intelligible content, like some really interesting point of view, even if it's like complete opposite of where I stand, I will hear it out because I want to be proven wrong. And if I can't prove it right by how I articulate it or how I do it, do I really believe it in the first place? And that even goes into my belief in Jesus Christ. Challenge me. I dare you. Like, come on, like that's what I want, because I want to grow. And then too, if I can't prove it wrong, I don't want to be sitting there believing something that, is not going to serve me. So.
Yeah, that's good. I really appreciate that, man. That takes a lot for somebody to take a belief of theirs they hold so like deeply, and then allow people to question that, because I feel like that is a big downside or downfall of this populace or whatever culture. Is that people have these beliefs, and if anybody even says anything in contrary of that belief, they get offended and they
just throw a bunch of rocks at them.
Yeah,
right?
they just personally attack the person back, because
especially social media.
Yeah, right. And it's just like they can't handle having any sort of opposition. Interesting. And this gets into a whole different thing. And I'm a big fan of Dan Millman.
Never heard of him.
Oh, you should look into them. You talk about the wisdom side and the grit side, and
Yeah.
I think he leans a little bit into the wisdom side, but he definitely tries to bring it both together. But one of the things he says is in the shadow side. And have you ever done any shadow work or know anything about that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so basically,
transformed my life.
Yeah, so basically the gist of it is that anything that triggers you, if you see something out there that triggers you, it's because in a deep, dark part of yourself is that you have a part of that inside of you.
Yeah.
And like, so to be ultimately enlightened or whatever is that if somebody calls you something, like he said somebody came over, he's like, you're a jerk, and he's like, there probably is a certain part of me that is I'm a jerk. And he's like, and there's probably a certain part of me that I'm like violent or whatever, but I don't act on those things, but there's a part of me that is abusive or offensive or whatever. There's parts of us that's inside of us that we are these things, and we don't necessarily and most people won't admit that they have these other sides inside of them, and that and really to become, because these triggers run our life, and they're like constantly pulling us in this direction or that direction. And you can get rid of triggers by realizing the things or becoming aware, honest and aware of these things that are causing it.
That's interesting, man. That whole it's funny because somebody told me that the other day, because I am a huge enemy towards socialism. I freaking hate every aspect of it. I think it's like one of the most dangerous thought patterns that we have as a civilization, in a lot of ways, because it takes away personal responsibility. Are y'all familiar with the term Stockholm Syndrome by chance? So it basically, in a scenario where, let's say a bank gets held hostage, where the hostage will actually fall in love with the person who's taking the bank hostage as a response to their survival, right? But they don't understand it. So it's like this weird complexity. And I realized last night, I was sitting there thinking about it, and I was like, dude, I think that for the most part, people have become, it's like this weird Stockholm Syndrome experiment that's going on politically on both sides a lot of time. I'm a huge conservative, but even that, whenever you leave it unchecked, when we start putting too much stock in conservative or liberal or whatever else on any of these things, there's this level of that's going to take care of me. And it's like we've literally become a captive, in love with our captor, right? Rather than being free and operating at a level where it's and all of this stuff, by the way, all this whole conversation that we've had today and everything, every problem, every filter issue and all that, it all comes back down to identity. Who do you think that you are? And more importantly, from my perspective, who does God say that you are? Because if you don't understand that, do you always be like the tail of the dog? The tail of the dog. Because you're never going to know what you stand on. You have no foundation built in the things that truly matter. And if you don't know what you stand for, if I go into a room and somebody who doesn't have identity and I could peg it like that, I could literally go into them and be like, whatever their belief system, knowing that, and I could go in there and start looking in their eye and start going against everything that they believe, and they would more than likely fall in line with it because they don't have what it takes internally, that secure foundation of knowing exactly who they are and what they stand for to stand against it. And that's, politicians are a freaking perfect example in a lot of ways, because they just want that freaking vote and they're not willing to put themselves on the line in a true way,
Totally. I can't remember what I was saying. Billy Nelson, he said, stand for something or you fall for everything.
Yeah, that's yeah, exactly. But it all stems back down to identity.
But if you go back to that, right? So I have the exact same opinion, right?
Yeah.
So the whole deal, we're very aligned on that. And deep down, and this will be a challenging thing of your identity and your beliefs, is that deep down somewhere that you feel that socialism is a good thing or something there because it does trigger you. There's some part of you that wants to be taken care of.
So I've thought about that because I'm like, how does that play into it, right? my belief is not that the government should be taking care of people. For example, there in my neighborhood is a young girl and this younger guy, and they had a baby together. I'm talking like younger. Like my mom was 16 when I was born, so I'm lucky to be here. By today's standards, I probably even wouldn't be, based on everybody's desire to have abortions and all this kind of stuff. I'm making y'all show like really, really, I'm sure people are whatever. But anyway, so you get into it, and the thing is like, I had to check my own heart on this, right? Because now I'm like, okay, so I don't want her to go have an abortion. And I know that they're like destitute. He works at like a Krispy Kreme donut at that point, and all this kind of stuff. And they're just in a hard space. So what do we do, in that situation? Because it's not just about telling somebody, hey, don't have an abortion, and then, making sure they don't and then moving on. Like, we got to be a part of that solution. It's not the government's job to do that. It's our job individually. And until we get our heads and our hearts right and we are secure on our identity inside of that, dude, we're going to keep talking all kinds of BS out this side of our mouth and acting this way. They have to be in alignment. If you don't want people having abortions, then you got to be there willing to help the single mother who had the balls, for lack of a better term, to freaking move through with it. You know what I'm saying? And provide for that child. And that doesn't mean that you're taking away from her personal responsibility, because I'm huge on personal responsibility. Like, if you're blaming anybody or you think that anything's unfair or needs to be fair over here, I'm like, I hate that. Like, I'm coming out against it hardcore. But I'm also, I think that it's the hearts of the people and the minds of the people. Like, until we get to that point where we're willing to step in and be like, you know what? You don't need the government, man. Like, I'm going to come alongside. I want to teach you how to provide for yourself. Like, I don't always charge people. I mean, I have my coaching and it's not cheap. But there are times when I know that somebody has capacity for something and I know that they truly can't afford what I'm doing. The mission to me is way more important than the money, period.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do what I can. And even if that means whenever she didn't have a car, and the girl, and she's like literally walking with this child, in the coldest of the cold or the hottest of the hot, because she didn't have a car, and she's like wheeling him off. He finally got a job at Walmart. And so she would be like walking like 3 or 4 miles every day just to go to Walmart to get out, so she'd have something to eat, and so we were bringing her food and bringing them food and stuff like that. And if we see her walking, it's like, hey, jump in the car, let's go, and I'll take her over there, whatever it is, and it's like, just take, like, even when it was not convenient. And I'm not saying, hey, look at Cory, he's doing that. Like, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that should just be status quo. Like, we should all be doing that.
Like, what would life look at like if all of us as individual people just took a stand for the people around us? And
yeah, what would it look like? That's a great question. Like, when I ran for city council, my mission, really, my underlying mission inside of that was like, if I can see one city, my small city of 40,000 people, operating at the highest level, where there is no family that's hungry, there's nobody who's like the divorce rate is the lowest in the country, like marriages are like flourishing in this city, people aren't worrying about how they're going to pay for their bills, like, and all this kind of stuff. And not that that's the government's job, but what would that look like? I want to see that. I desire to see that with everything inside of me. So now I've got 800 men that I'm trying to do that with, right? At the end of the day, they have to make the decision to do it. I'm not their daddy and I'm not their savior. So like, they've got to step it up and be that guy. But if I can provide the opportunity there and they grab it, it's their duty, not mine, right? We are not responsible for how they turn out in life. Like, all we can do is provide those things. And that's the hardest thing I had to get over, was thinking, I'm going to, like, you're going to do this, that, because I tend to be very, like, on point like that. Which is also why I work with men, because I don't know that I would actually be able to not make women cry all the time, to be honest with you. But, I know I don't mind ripping into a dude, So.
It's good to.
I feel the same.
Yeah, I have a big saying that's, it's not mine personally. I got it from a guy named Steve Barber. He says, do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. And it really makes a big difference. And so, for our listeners who are listening, like, yes, I truly, like, I want to be a part of a brothership. I need a brothership. Or maybe for the wives who are like, my husband or my partner needs a brotherhood, just like Cory's, to go and, because this isn't, if guys are listening, amazing. But, wives and women that are listening too, this is about lifting up our men, right? Because
100%.
our role really isn't just, rise of the feminine. It's it's rising each other. And the more we can, as women, empower and lift up our men and encourage them to go be a part of a brotherhood that's going to really help them break free from limiting beliefs and go be that powerful person that they are, it's going to trickle through and come back in the relationship. It's going to come back through like in family, in all different areas. So women listening to this too, if this is like any, if you're thinking like my spouse needs this, where can they go to find you?
So we have a Facebook group called Wisdom and Grit. You can just go type that into the search bar. It'll pop up. Also wisdomandgrit.com. So that's where you can find me there. And then on YouTube, I'm starting to put all of our episodes because I do a weekly podcast inside of the group. So I'm moving all of those from inside of the group onto the YouTube channel. I've got one now, so it takes some time to kind of put them all in there. But I've got some really top-notch influencers and stuff that I've interviewed, and it's not like all the same old people that everybody else is interviewing. I really work hard to bring in really interesting people that hardly anybody knows about. There are times where I bring in like a top level influencer, but for the most part, I'm interested in the people that are kind of behind the scenes that are doing big things or have done big things. And, because that's what this is really all about. This isn't about what, the top level influencer can do. This is about what you can do, today and what you're called to do and what you have a duty to do. And the world is starving for that. And I loved what you said, by the way, about the women, and equipping each other inside of that, because that was a big thing with my wife. I think for the longest time, she thought I was trying to, we fix things as guys, right? I mean, there's no secret to that. Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is like, I think my wife kind of expected, or she thought that I was trying to change her. And it goes back to this whole concept of, like, I was talking with a friend of mine yesterday, and I said something, and he's like, dude, you need to use that for your offer. But he's like, basically I said, it's not about becoming something you're not, but becoming all of what you were already intended to be. And that for a guy, like, I can totally relate with Chad here. It's like when we're working, when we're hearing y'all are saying, it's like, it's not that we're trying to fix you because we have some ego to fulfill. It's because we desire to see you operating at the highest level too. Like, dudes want power couple status. Like, I mean, that's just the way that it is, So it's like, when you're at that level, then you're a team. You know what I'm saying? And like, a team works like this. They don't work like where you're reliant on each other. But you want to experience those things together. And if you think of it in terms as you're the queen and he's the king, like, queens don't go and hang out in the peasant store and act like a peasant. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, they lead these people and they make sure that the kingdom is flourishing so that those peasants can have every opportunity to be successful. And people need to get into their heads and start realizing, like, dude, we have a duty. This is no longer if I want to or whatever else. Like, if we don't, the onus lies on us when this world breaks down, So, and that's a little bit theatric probably, but at the same time, it's like, I really do believe that, Like, we're at an interesting point in culture where we're watching this massive shift take place, and a lot of people are confused. They're so inundated with social media and with everything else that they're not even educating themselves on things that are actually beneficial to how we live as a culture, right? It's all about, like, oh, look at that. I got to become this because and it's everybody's like one-upping each other all the time, and it's gross. More than gross, it's extremely destructive, and we haven't even like tapped into the utter damage I think that can bring one step. So, Wisdom and Grit is just a call to that. What you guys are doing is a call to that. And like, we have a lot of work to do, but just to put you at ease, during the Revolutionary War, only 3% of the entire population of what was then it wasn't the United States, but just the my brain just went blank.
Colonies.
Yeah, the colonies, the United Colonies. Only 3% of the entire colony people, they all fought against the British, and we ended up winning against that. So what God will have done, and nothing will stand between that. You know what I'm saying? So I want to be in that 3%.
Like, yeah.
I've never heard that. That's awesome.
Yep. Thank you so much, Cory. I really just value, again, everything that you're doing. Liz, we will definitely put your website in the comment section of this so people can go and check you out. And
awesome.
Make sure, guys, go check Wisdom and Grit. Ladies, go send your men over. Thank you so much for everything, and tune in next time.
Appreciate y'all. See ya.